So we're going to finish talking about the endocrine system by talking about stress. I find it interesting the timing that I'm doing this. This is actually the middle of the last week of classes, and so there is a lot of stress on campus right now. And so we're going to talk about stress, maybe not in the way that you think about it, but from a physiological standpoint. And so with that, we have these 3 outcomes. All right, so what is stress? Well, stress can basically be described as anything that takes us out of homeostasis. And by being out of homeostasis, there is some sort of response. It's not anything specific, it's just, it gets you out of homeostasis. Now, the way that we deal with stress and adapt to it is referred to as the general adaptation syndrome. And there are 3 different stages to the general adaptation syndrome, and we're going to talk about each of those specifically. And so these 3 phases are the alarm stage, resistance stage, and exhaustion stage. So let's start with the alarm stage. Okay, when I think of alarm, I think of red alert, like if you've seen any, military movies or anything like that. But basically, something's happened because we've encountered a stressor. In other words, we're out of homeostasis. So when we have some sort of stressor, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And if you recall from our journey through the nervous system, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, norepinephrine and epinephrine are released. This is activating your fight or flight response. Okay, and so as a result, you're going to have increased blood pressure, increased blood glucose, and there's going to be other things that occur, but basically kind of the way to think about it is, well, what's going to happen if you see a bear? What's going to happen if you see a shark? Okay, now that's not the only type of stressor that we can encounter, but we do have a sympathetic response when we get out of homeostasis. What's also interesting is that we activate something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Okay, so this is a hormonal pathway, and you've actually already talked about, or we've already talked about this pathway. This is a pathway that is slow to respond, but it lasts a lot longer. Okay, this shouldn't be too surprising as we're dealing with hormones, and hormones, when compared to neurons or neurotransmitters, are slow to act, but they last longer. So this starts, as we talked about earlier, with the release of corticotropin-releasing hormone. CRH causes the release of ACTH, okay, and ACTH comes from your anterior pituitary, and ultimately ACTH causes the release of cortisol from your adrenal gland. Okay, we've talked about all 3 of these hormones. So what does cortisol do? Well, if you recall from a previous video, it's going to ultimately increase blood glucose. This is good because you're going to need energy to fight off or to get back into homeostasis. One of the downsides of cortisol is that we suppress our immune system. And this happens so that we can direct resources to fighting off this stressor or to overcoming this stressor. And so in the short term, we're not worried about our immune system. We're worried about getting back into homeostasis. Ultimately, with the help of cortisol, we're increasing our metabolism and we're maintaining or maybe even increasing our blood pressure. If we get through the alarm stage, but that stressor is still present, we go to the resistance stage. And so that HPA axis is still doing its job. However, the parasympathetic nervous system comes in to try and tone things down a little bit. Okay, we talked about the sympathetic nervous system, right? And the sympathetic nervous system will do things such as increase blood pressure. Well, you don't want increased blood pressure for a long period of time. Okay, that can have negative effects. And so the parasympathetic nervous system tries to counteract that. Okay, and so as a result, we have reduced effects of the sympathetic nervous system because of the parasympathetic nervous system, but at the same time, we've got this HPA axis that's keeping cortisol concentrations high. Okay, so as we're going through this resistance stage, the body's trying to get things back to normal, and specifically with our energy stores. We're trying to repair anything that's damaged. But again, this costs energy. Cortisol is helping us have that energy, but it's coming at a cost. We're depleting our reserves. Okay, and so what we're doing during the resistance stage is, instead of being on high alert, we're really trying to repair or fix or adapt to this stressor. So if at the end of the resistance stage, the stressor is still there, we reach the exhaustion stage. The exhaustion stage is not where we want to be. Like I said, we're in the middle of the last week of class right now, and many of us, including professors, feel the way that this individual does in the picture. And why? Because we have depleted resources. We've probably had lack of sleep. That doesn't help. Now, if we reach the exhaustion stage and the stressor is gone, we're going to be okay because we're going to be able to recover. We've gotten rid of the thing that's caused us to be tired, caused us to be exhausted. However, if the stressor is still present, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for the body to cope. Difficult is probably a better word, okay? And so that high cortisol released by the HPA axis continues to be there, but it's coming at a huge cost. Remember, cortisol suppresses the immune system, so it's going to be a lot easier to get sick, okay? This increased activity, this could lead to cardiovascular strain. Your heart, your cardiovascular system is working harder than normal. That's not a good thing either, okay? And so if we get to the exhaustion stage, hopefully, if we haven't already, we can get rid of that stressor so we can start to recover. And so here's a schematic that shows what's going on. Now notice on the left, we have short-term response, and on the right, we have long-term response, okay? They're similar, but they're different. So I want to talk about each of these individually. So with short-term stress, this is where we just really focus on using epinephrine and norepinephrine. Remember, those are released almost immediately. This gets that fight or flight kicked into gear. So we have the increased heart rate, blood pressure, blood glucose, all these things. While you might not necessarily be running away from a bear or responding to the fact that there's a bear in your campground, it's these similar kind of responses. If this is enough for you to overcome the stress, life is good. However, like we mentioned, if the stress lasts for a while, we shift things. And so we shift to aldosterone and cortisol. Okay, each of these hormones does specific things. We've talked a lot in this video already about cortisol, but let's talk a little bit about aldosterone. That's, as you know, going to cause you to reabsorb sodium, get rid of potassium, and by holding on to sodium, we hold on to water, which will increase that blood volume. If you have high blood volume, you're going to have high blood pressure. As we've mentioned with cortisol, it's going to increase your blood sugar. It's going to do this in a lot of different ways. One of them is by forming sugar from some of the substrate that you have in your body, but it's also going to reduce your immune function, which will also reduce inflammation. This can be good in helping you overcome the stress, but if you're in this state for too long, that can be bad, and it makes it more likely for you to get sick, right? This is the end of fall semester. We're December, it's cold outside, people are stressed, people are tired, people aren't taking care of themselves. What happens? It makes it a lot easier for them to get sick. So at the end of this video, can you do these three things? Can you define stress? Can you identify the three stages of the stress response? And can you describe what is occurring during each stage?